Yeah, I fresh back on from my first vacation in years. Had my galactic whale portal initiation. I was joking about the other day. Get into that on the show later, but not today. Today on the show, we are here to talk about updates from this Oregon Health Authority psilocybin mushroom initiative, and it's going to be pretty interesting. And I imagine you and I are going to get pretty excitable as we're discussing this topic as well. It's really a close topic to our hearts. Let me just confirm the live stream's good. The live stream is good, John. So let's kick it off. So a lot's happened. We skipped last time. Well, I was not there. You were there. And you got to have the Grand Padrino, Santo Daime, the person who brought this through the ayahuasca church through the Supreme Court, Jonathan Goldman. So I advise you all go watch that. It's amazing that we were able to secure him and he was willing to contribute.
Yeah, he's just been such a great resource, for, I think, people who are trying to figure this out. He's been very, very accommodating. Anytime I've come to him with questions on stuff, he's just been so helpful. And I think, it's important to try to get, people who are really well-established kind of spiritual and religious practitioners to kind of come in and weigh in on the process and to give their input on how this can be done, safely, with also giving full freedom to make sure that we're not over-regulating and, but that, again, that safety, safety, accessibility, and affordability balance is just kind of the name of the game.
Quite the access, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've done a ton of work recently, John, trying to figure all that out. We'll get into a lot of that later, I believe, but it's like a really important topic, especially for those of us who believe that psychedelics should be used. People should be allowed to use psychedelics in religious practice. And I find it a complicated topic, John, because, what isn't religious for the right person? So let's dig in.
Very delicately worded. Yes.
You have some updates on rules that you think might be coming through the pipes from the OHA. Like, were there rules submitted to the OHA, or what happened there?
Yeah. So
this is Oregon Health Authority, everybody, for those who don't know.
Yeah, OHA is Oregon Health Authority. And again, the usual caveats are this is all about recommendations. We don't have any final proposed rules yet. So none of this should be relied upon as a statement as to what the rules will ultimately be. This is just trying to get closer and closer and closer to him with increasing confidence, but we don't really know yet. So take that all.
Does anything you say count as a legal opinion, John?
Well, I don't know. Let's do a group poll here. Who thinks that this is legal advice? Good. No one. Correct. This is not legal advice. Thank you.
And John is not your lawyer unless you paid him money and he agreed.
Correct.
So, yeah. All right. Onward. OHA rules.
Yeah. So the OHA rules. The rules making process. Jesse Sweet is the person who drafts them for OHA. He calls the process, he said, I think recently, it's peak bureaucracy, which is, I think, a really correct assessment. That between just the recommendations, then I believe there's a step where it goes to the tribe, so they get to kind of weigh in and evaluate them. And then it goes to a rules advisory committee. And then it goes to public comment, and then it comes back, and then final rules are promulgated. So that's a really long, somewhat convoluted process, which is important to get the stakeholder input. And it's not like it's a bad thing. It's just a slow moving process. And so what we have now, for the first time really ever in this rulemaking period, is proposed rules that were drafted by the Oregon Health Authority. Around products, training, and testing of products. So that's kind of the big news, I guess. And over the next 2 weeks, there's going to be 4 different meetings of these rule advisory committees that weigh in on the proposed rules to see if there's something that is missing or something that needs to be changed. It's just kind of like a focus group type of situation where experts who have been chosen to be on these committees weigh in and give their feedback to make sure that nothing important's missing. So that's kind of the big news, but we do have finally several versions of draft rules, lots of pages of draft rules here, and some of the stuff is very interesting. So I won't go into all of the detail, but in the interest of time, I'll kind of go over some of the things that I found to be interesting while going through these. First off, on the training side of it, there's a question of who gets to provide training to Oregon facilitators. And so training programs have to be approved by the Oregon Health Authority. And so for the first time, we have a proposed recommendation for how OHA may deny a training program from being able to offer training. And the thing here is fairly vague. It doesn't give a ton of information. So one of the reasons why they could be denied is if they don't meet kind of the requirements, which are like they're not covering the right curriculum or the right balance of in-person versus online type of training, or not enough practicum training, that sort of thing. So there's that, which is fairly obvious. And then, so there's that as the first option. And then there's only the second option, which under these draft rules, which is that the program instructors, staff, or representatives have made false or misleading statements to the authority, I mean, the Oregon Health Authority, the students, or the public. So it's a pretty short list of things that could get a potential trainer disqualified from doing that. And I'm not sure how loose or tight of a net we'd want to let how many people come through to do this. I'm curious. I mean, I know you guys and gals, Joe, have recently come out with Vital, which looks like an incredible program that you've all spent a lot of time and effort putting forward. And I was kind of curious. I mean, you all are working in this space, and I wonder what are the kinds of things you would like to see as a potential disqualifier for a training program? Like what kinds of things should prevent someone from offering training to psychedelic facilitators?
It's a massive question, John. I think something like, well-documented history of sexual abuse, especially in psychedelic contexts. If it's not well documented, it's hard to really push that forward, right? What else?
Because an allegation isn't the same as, how do you know at what point, like, how do you know when it actually arises to that point is difficult to, you just really can't. There's people who get off scot-free who did something horrible, and there's other people who are, falsely convicted. So it's like, how do you even know that?
Yeah. And, there's all sorts of kinds of abuse here in the psychedelic space, and not all of it sexual. And, we've got to really just watch that. I don't know, it's a really great question. And I think for whatever reason, I'm coming up with what people have to go through to get clearance for working for the feds, like military or the FBI or something, where you actually have to get references done. Like people actually call a whole mess of people from your past and validate that you're a good person, which is quite the concept, right? Like who knows what that really means. But, we should be doing some serious background checks on people that are getting involved. What would restrict? I can't think of too many, honestly, John. Like,
what about the qualifications for instructors? That's part of it. Is there's going to be program leads and people who are in charge of the program itself and actually administering it. What do you think? This is the problem of Oregon is I think we're going to start this with a massive shortage of qualified facilitators, right? Because this is all, in some ways, this is a wholly new industry. Obviously it's not wholly new. Obviously we have the indigenous history that goes back forever. And we also have the underground that's been doing this. But I think the widespread nature of this is it's going to be, there's not, and we also have this system in Oregon that for the first 2 years of the program, prevents people who are non-residents from coming in and offering facilitation. So we're going to have to internally develop this this group of this whole state full of facilitators, and this program that will presumably attract clients and people taking psilocybin from all over the planet, since this will be the first like regulated, licensed kind of place to.
Do you remember this conundrum, John, in cannabis, where it's like, where do the genetics come from? All of a sudden you're legal, but there has to be this black market bridge into the legal system, because how are we getting well, it's legal to get spores in most states. I actually don't know. Can you in Oregon legally purchase spores? California is illegal.
Yeah, so I think, well, in Idaho, where I live next to, it's illegal to possess spores, and same thing in California. In Oregon, it doesn't violate state law, but if you currently possess them with intent to manufacture, it is illegal because of the intent. But if you just possess them for curiosity, or for you're gonna like look at them under your microscope or something like that, if you can,
the law is really fun, right? Intent.
Yeah.
So like, we're going to have this crux, and we're going to have this settling in period, right? Of what does this thing actually need to grow into? And people are going to freak out, right? Because, there's people dying of cancer. There's people with all sorts of disorders that want to get treated in this kind of new paradigm of mental health, which is really fascinating in and of itself. But there's going to be probably a big boost, in my opinion, in gray black market activity as a result of this lack of available, legal, approved facilitators, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you thought about that? Have you seen discussion about this at the state level?
Not at the state level officially. I've heard that from some people who are close to the measure and who are more dialed into Portland scene. I live 6 hours away from Portland, so I'm not like super dialed in there, but I've heard from some people who are, that a lot of the underground facilitators and guides are not planning to go and operate within the measure because it's thought to be too restrictive. It's not clear yet, and this is something that Oregon Health Authority could do that would help solve this problem of a skilled facilitator shortage. That would allow, like, just because a person becomes licensed to operate as a facilitator, I think it makes sense to allow them to continue practicing underground, so long as they continue to abide by the best practices and the ethical codes and all that that bind them. I think of it like as an attorney. I'm a mandatory reporter, and that ability, that mandatory reporter. Hey, William, thanks for joining on. Nice to see you here. As a mandatory reporter, that obligation follows me everywhere I go, and even if I
around what, like, what kind of topics are mandatory for you to report?
Like child abuse, elder abuse. There's like the big ones, and so I think that if we thought of like the facilitator's duties being kind of lasting outside of just like the formal like under the measure, like practice under the measure, then I think it would remove some of the disincentives that facilitators would have to go and practice above ground, because I just really think that there's going to be such a shortage of people who do this in the early days. And I think some of the messiness of the program is going to be in part because it's going to take time to build the competencies, particularly since we are not allowing out-of-state folks to come in and facilitate. So if we think of this, how big this program is going to be, and the fact most of these people probably have never done this before, this first kind of generation, first few generations of graduates from facilitator training programs are probably going to just have some challenges, I think, until it just gets kind of more established and kind of dialed in. But I think one thing the state could do to help diminish that would be to allow facilitators to practice underground, even though they're licensed to practice under the measure.
That's going to be a troubling situation. I don't know. I would like to have faith that that's going to shake out great, but I kind of have my doubts. I think there's going to be a rocky road, at least for the first couple of years here, right?
Yeah.
No way around that. I can't see a way around it anyway.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, I think there's this thought of, these facilitators are going to be woefully ill-equipped or whatever. But, I don't know. I finally just met, like, within the last 6 months, I think, a person who had their first psychedelic experience with a facilitator. Outside of that, every person I've ever known who's ever had a psychedelic had their first experience just kind of with friends or by themselves, mostly with friends and not with people without formal training. So, there is a part of me that's like worried that there's not going to be competencies like on day one. But on the other hand, I think,
like, why would there be?
right. But it may not really result in all that much harm, but so it's just kind of like curious to think about how that's going to play out ultimately. But
these are some of the safest substances on the planet. So
yeah.
all this nervous activity is just kind of undue paranoia, resulting from decades of lies from the feds and other organizations about the nature of these substances, in particular these mushrooms. And yeah, it's troubling. Well, anyway, any other rules from OHA, John?
Yeah, one of the things that is on here that, well, it appears that the training around administration includes dosing strategies and considerations, including experiential differences relating to different doses. So that doesn't say that microdosing is allowed necessarily. It doesn't necessarily provide for special protections, but it sure, in my reading, is ambiguous or vague enough that it would certainly leave room for that for people who are into that. We're going to get into that again here real quick, but there's it says also use of secondary doses. So that means
boosters and stuff, right?
Yeah, I think the booster doses may be allowed, which I think is another great aspect of that, because, particularly for people who are new to psilocybin, who are trying to find out their dose, you want to maybe start on a lower side and going up, because obviously you can't ever take less, you can only take more. So it's glad to see something written in here to support there being a booster doses allowed, because I think that's really important. One concern I had was it appears that I don't know if this was just a typo or what, but on the integration piece, I've been commenting for a while that the health authority really needs to allow multiple prep sessions and multiple integration sessions, because
not make mandatory, but allow for.
Correct. Yeah. Like
it's kind of hard to argue. Are they arguing against that?
I think, well, I think the therapists kind of organization, the group that licensed therapists in Oregon feels very threatened by this. I think they started thinking that this was like a therapeutic program, in part because that's how it was sold to voters. But now that more lawyers and other journalists and other people are writing and talking about this in a more careful and nuanced way, I think it's starting to become known that this isn't just like therapy. This is a whole kind of new paradigm of healing and wellness that doesn't really just fit within the therapeutic container like really easily. So I think there's like I think they're feeling like their toes are getting stepped on a little bit, potentially. But so the integration.
So they're responding by saying you can only have one session.
There was argument earlier on in this process that they should limit, in fact, as recently as maybe a month or two ago, that for a regular facilitator who has no extra credentials or licensing, which it wasn't really clear from that proposal what they meant by that they'd be limited to basically one prep session, and I think one integration session is my recollection of that. And that was concerning because, one of the most dispositive factors of client outcomes in my reading of the literature is a positive relationship with your facilitator. That if you have a trusting, knowing, and perhaps even a loving relationship with that person, that's going to result in the most safety feeling, the most trust. And that is just positive in many cases for outcomes. So, we don't want to just narrowly try to say, okay, you've talked for 10 minutes, now go trip. Like we want time to allow discernment there and to really work through whether this is a good idea, work through the risks, give people a chance to change their mind and
here's an
work
example,
through.
John, and this might be helpful for people. Like, I very rarely run sessions. I did some legally in Jamaica years ago, and I did 6 to 8 hours of prep and post with people. There's no promise that your therapist is going to like mushrooms or like that you're doing this work. And in fact, the therapist might try to shame you. I've seen a number of healthcare professionals shame me and some of my friends about psychedelics and psychedelic use. And it's not very helpful to have authority figures kind of shame you around that. It's not helpful. And I would fear that a lot of this would really happen.
Yeah. So the thing that I liked in the draft rules around integration is that it does appear to allow a kind of a wider latitude for more than just a referral to a therapist after an administration session. It says the goals, the training on integration should include discussion of the goals of integration, which include the exploration of negative feelings from the psilocybin session, the facilitation of positive internal and external changes, and enhancement of existing supportive relationships. I wonder also why they don't put exploration of positive feelings from the session, because that seems equally at home, and this isn't therapy. But the thing that scared me about this is it says the goal of integration session in the singular. So I don't know if that was just like a typo, or if they're suggesting by that there is only one that's allowed. But I'm really
Have you commented to them? Have they responded at all?
I've raised it on a number of meetings, and we're talking about it now. And I think people who are involved at OHA, I think people watch this, or some of them do at least. And so it's just like a critical, like basic thing that I think it would be just kind of sad if it weren't included, because it would be something that was motivated by an unjustified fear of unauthorized practice of therapy. And so there is plenty in here to talk about the scope of practice and unauthorized practice of other disciplines like medicine and therapy. So I think with those subject areas, that stuff should get covered, and that should be pretty much should be all that's really needed to ensure that those are, allowed. So the other last kind of interesting thing I want to talk about on the draft training rules is that we finally have some idea of how the state intends to solve like the first generation issue where there's no psilocybin and there's nobody who's licensed yet. And I think there's a little bit of vagueness in these rules, but if a practicum site is not available, which means a service center that offers practicum training, the training shall include a placement at a practicum site where, sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. If it's not reasonably available or accessible to students, a training program may identify alternative training in their application for approval that reasonably approximates training at a practicum site. It may include a taped facilitation session that was recorded with participants' consent, participating in peer support networks, observation of administration sessions conducted at a service center, role-playing, and experience with altered states of consciousness that are not drug-induced, including, for example, breathwork or meditation. So it's not clear to me when I read that whether that's just like limited to the first generation of people who go through this program, or if that's something that's intended to remove barriers to access to people all over the place, and kind of allow someone to start becoming a psilocybin facilitator without actually having experience with working with psilocybin. I'm not sure. I think it's a complicated issue, and I don't think it really falls on an easy answer, but I generally think that most people who facilitate really ought to not only have worked with psilocybin specifically, but they also should have taken it. And I would like to see in here something that requires facilitators to take psilocybin as part of their practicum training, unless they have some kind of mushroom allergy or other contraindication that would make it medically non-advisable for them to do so.
Right. I would like to see all programs kind of require it. And yes, I think medical reasons for not consuming is a good reason not to. That said, what then we get into all the minutia, John, about what constitutes a medical issue. Like that could be a 2-hour conversation alone. So this is not easy stuff. And this was supposed to be a short update on OHA rules, everybody. And we're at 27 minutes in. So John, where do we want to go? Do we want to blast through it, or do we want to? Because the real meat's at the end.
Yeah. All right. We can talk about religion here in a bit. So on the products piece, there wasn't a lot that jumped out. I mean, it seems like the rules were actually somewhat less restrictive than I kind of expected them to be. So that's good. I think it's going to provide lower cost pathways for cultivation and lower price cost products, which is great. That was the other thing about the training is it seems like they're going to allow group preparation and group integration, which is good. My slight concern is group preparation might not be for everyone, and maybe there's some delicate conversations that there may be like social pressures to not raise concerns around friends or strangers.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Like some people are not good candidates for group. I actually recorded with a pretty experienced ayahuasquero around that this morning. And we need to be aware of that. Some people need one-on-one support. That said, how do we regulate that? I don't know. I don't know that we necessarily should, but I think there should be some people like us putting media out, trying to keep people safe. Because how many people went to a group ayahuasca session for their first time, even though they might not have been a great candidate?
Yeah, probably most people at this point. Yeah, probably the vast majority of people. Yeah, so that's kind of it. I think. I mean, those are the big points I wanted to touch on from the proposed rules. And so, those meetings, there's 4 of them over the next 2 weeks, and then after that, it's just kind of up to public comment. So we'll see. It's kind of exciting. We're getting close to having some final rules adopted, particularly around products and training. So. So that happened.
All right, let's jump into microdosing then, John.
So
this is a fun one.
There was so much drama on this. It almost boggles the mind of how just controversial this is. And I mean, I get we all are passionate about these issues, and we all care deeply for people and their safety and their wellness, and there's that. But so there was and I don't know the full details of it. There was actually an article that ran, I think, in Lucid News. I believe there was one in a Portland paper or regional Oregon paper called the Willamette Week that kind of looked at microdosing and the drama that happened there. So at a research subcommittee meeting, so the Mason Marks is the head of the project lead for the Harvard Project on Psychedelics Law and Regulation. He sits on the Psilocybin Advisory Board, and he had invited during his portion of that meeting, Dr. James Fadiman to come and present to the committee on microdosing. For those of you who don't know, James Fadiman is considered by many to be kind of the what do we call, like the godfather or something of microdosing, or the kind of the person who,
in a lot of ways, he is the one responsible for popularizing the concept, and that's rarely argued. It's a traditional concept. Many cultures have been doing it for many years. So yeah, Jim Fadiman's the popularizer. His book, Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, still my #1 most recommended book. When people are asking me questions, send them there. And there's a whole breakdown on microdosing there. He, in a recent interview we did with him, updated his numbers a little bit, but that's about it. he still stands by it. There's all sorts of drama now around the theoretical heart issue, but I don't know where to stand on that. I kind of don't give it much credit, and people are being cautious, and that's what people do, right? I'm just not that guy to that degree. We made it through the 60s fine, and we're here now.
Yeah, and it seems like the concern about it largely arises out of the fen-phen context, and I think people, from what my understanding of it is, people who took fen-phen and showed problems didn't take it on a regimen like people do with microdosing. They took it 7 days a week and took it, in some instances, very high doses for long periods of time. And I don't think, even with like a Stamets protocol, which is on the higher side of any microdosing protocol that I've heard, that still provides breaks and still isn't necessarily like indefinite in duration. So, how much that would apply compared to a very low dosing of psilocybin with breaks, how those two things correlate to each other is just, it's not well understood. I mean, I think we have to
barely agree on what they mean by microdosing. We should start there and say, like, we've got a long way to go before we are even on the same page about this. And I think the fear is that there's a really, really, really strong receptor site binding with psychedelics generally. So perhaps there's a difference from fen-phen to these. Perhaps, I don't know. I kind of don't think so, like in terms of medical risk, but that's me. I'm biased for sure. I'm not that interested in microdosing. Generally speaking, that said, I'm interested in some medical, some research around some situations. That said, if people want to do it, I don't care. It's safer than SSRIs. It's as far as we know, it's possibly as effective, if not more effective. The data is really rough. Like Zeus Tapito did a big article, I think, on psychedelic support. I think the title of the article was "Microdosing is Bullshit." We were hoping he would publish it here. They got it. Oh well. But it's I just want there to be active debate on this topic. And if somebody's eating small amounts of mushrooms twice a week, 3 times a week, even 7 times a week, and take some breaks, whatever, it's fine. Like, what are you trying to do here? Why?
And I just keep coming back to the extent that we have known potential risks. Like, we don't actually know. People are already microdosing, like white people are doing it widely, and
Massive amounts.
without the best up-to-date literature being presented to them before they make a decision about whether or not to microdose. So if we bring it into the service center, give trained professionals there to coach and to guide and to kind of help with the decision making around that and providing information, I think that's still just safer and more that's the kind of responsible drug use that I think we are moving towards, and this just helps to make it kind of transparent and safe. So at the meeting anyway, so the first half was this kind of largely anti-microdose, or not. It's hard to say.
Fadiman wasn't allowed to talk, really?
He was like an unsanctioned speaker, but he did speak and nobody cut him off. I mean, it was just kind of, when he speaks, the room just kind of held space, and it was kind of
he's very charismatic, and I'm glad that happened that way.
Yeah. And he's just kind of such a legend, like a monumental figure in psychedelics, and to think that he wouldn't even be allowed to present is just
silly,
because of some kind of bureaucratic.
Stephen Hawking shows up at a physics convention and can't talk.
Right, can't even get a seat. Yeah. That's probably about the best analogy for that. So so before we got on to religion, there's just like two other really super minor things. At a recent meeting of the training subcommittee, there's talk about what kind of information the program should require clients to give and require facilitators to take or to solicit from a client prior to the administration session.
Mhm.
And the question is how much trauma information, trauma history needs to be given. And there was a vote, unanimous vote. I think there was one abstention that the program must ask for detailed information about trauma history from every person who's going to take psilocybin. And we had at that meeting, Jody Ma. She is a world-renowned expert on trauma and a license. I don't know if she's still a licensed therapist or not, but she has been for a lot of years and has worked with, all kinds of people like prisoners of war and stuff like this with trauma, and has presented to at big conferences and stuff like that, and is just kind of an expert, and stood in and said during public comment that that's a horrible idea, that making everybody talk about trauma before you even, like, especially if you're only going to have these abbreviated prep sessions, just like, let's talk about all of the worst things you've ever done right before we go take psychedelics, is just probably not like a great recipe for like positive outcomes.
Yeah, fresh out of this funeral, let's eat some mushrooms. Like, it's silly. Yeah, and making it mandatory. This is where we have to think, like, we have to be really careful about regulation, people, because once you make these laws, it's hard to turn back the clock. And do you know what the right thing is? You might think you do, but do you? Think really carefully about that.
Yeah. And the other thing that came out of that same meeting that I took great issue with was there's a move to require that or prohibit facilitators from handling psilocybin. And I can understand why they might not want to, but to
seep through my
prohibit it,
skin and I might get high. Like, that doesn't happen to anybody. But go ahead, John. Sorry.
This just really punishes small service centers and small businesses, because like they made an exception that if the service center, the facilitator also owns the service center, then they can handle it. But otherwise, facilitators are not supposed to handle it. And so if you had like, that means that if you're the facilitator owner of a small service center, you'd have to be on the clock all the time. You'd have to show up 7 days a week to be there so you can actually administer it potentially or conceivably, or something along those lines. It's just kind of a thing that just is, I can't really imagine why they would want to prohibit a facilitator from accessing stuff, particularly if they're giving booster doses and stuff like that, or or secondary doses. Like I just didn't make any sense. There was really no explanation as to why imposing extra restrictions would be like a good thing to do. But that was a recommendation that got approved of by the training subcommittee just on.
Was it heated at all when that happened?
I think the first motion failed, and then they went back and they added, unless they are a service center operator, which tries to protect the small business, but it doesn't go far enough, because there's going to be plenty of small service centers where the service center operator isn't on the clock that day or whatever, isn't there at the center, and so it's just I just really don't understand the logic behind that one, but and it wasn't explained either. So anyway, so with all that, you want to talk about religion?
Ooh, politics and religion in 1 hour. All right. Yeah, I'm already fired up from that microdosing thing and the handling of psilocybin containing compounds. So, plants or fungi. Sorry, good Lord. Must be getting late. All right, John. So religion, where are we at? Can I open a church in Oregon?
Yes. Yes. As long as you have a couple of Oregonian people on your board that can make sure you're majority Oregon owned during the first 2 years. But nobody thinks that the state could discriminate against a religious institution and deny it an application just because it's a religious institution. So just by that alone, it's fair to say there will certainly be churches that open and operate under Measure 109 that use psilocybin as part of their religious practice. I mean, I've talked to numerous people now that are planning to do it. And I think we'll probably see at least some of them come forward and describe that. And but anyway, it's certainly going to happen. And so since it's going to happen, the question is, what does Oregon do about that? Do they make kind of special rules that make that system more affordable, more accessible, more equitable, and that provide broader religious protections? Or do they just say, tough luck, you're stuck with the four corners of the rest of the program? I have kind of advocated for a while now that there really ought to be multiple regulatory kind of frameworks for multiple containers. So clearly the therapeutic container is something that can exist in 109 in a more like licensed psychotherapy type of route. There will be more wellness spas, and I think that's kind of a container. And I think the religious practice is another container, another psychedelic healing modality that people will avail themselves of. And the thing is that we're interpreting, so this last couple of weeks at the board, the licensing subcommittee held its meeting, which was solely dedicated to religious use protections. And at that meeting, Bob Otis from the Sacred Garden community gave a really wonderful presentation kind of about their work and how they manage client safety issues and that sort of thing. And I also was invited. I was honored to speak at that committee and to kind of put forth my regulatory proposal for how Oregon could kind of protect sacred practice to the fullest extent available under Measure 109. So it's Oregon's doing this. It's really interesting. We've never had a system where religious freedoms have been determined by regulation. It's pretty much been decided, either at the court level or at the statute level, but not really through regulation at this level of detail.
And Oregon has like a really complicated history with religion and religious freedom on account of the whole Rajneesh Param, Rajneesh Osho situation. And there was, regulation that happened as a result of that. And that's interesting and quite unique, I think, in terms of states in the US.
Yeah, that is an interesting history that I haven't actually thought about in a little while. That's true. And that got out of hand, I think, by the time they were poisoning water supplies and, trying to kill people.
Nobody played that well. Nobody played that well.
Got a little out of hand, we'll say, mildly. Well, that history and the history I've been referring to regularly has just been the Oregon v. Smith history, where Oregon basically sent it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court and got it determined that the First Amendment doesn't protect a religious practitioner if their religion involves the use of psychedelics. So there's been a whole sea change of opinion.
That was a state level decision, John?
It started at the state level and it went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. They argued it under both Oregon Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and it lost at both levels. So in response to that, 3 years later, RFRA passed, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was a direct rebuke of Oregon discriminating against a psychedelic religion. And, in 2006, we had the UDV case, Unao de Vegetal case. It went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court for the right to use ayahuasca in ceremony as an Amazonian, syncretic religion that came into the United States. And so now we have multiple, cases that have been decided at the federal appellate level that clearly guarantee the right of religious practitioners to practice with the use of psychedelics. But the problem is it's not binding on the state. So Oregon could still discriminate against it if it wanted to. But the hope here is that Oregon decides that it doesn't want to do that anymore, and that it just provides a little more room and a little more space for religious practice beyond kind of the general rules that would apply to most non-religious practitioners. I should say that the proposed framework doesn't just apply to religions; it applies to non-religious spiritual organizations as well. So when we say religious, we don't mean you have to like join like another church or something like that. But it creates kind of a container for safe ceremonial practice. The part about this model that I ran out of time during my presentation to the state committee, and the thing that I really wanted to emphasize but couldn't was that this is more of a community-led model. It's a community container instead of, so under the generally applicable framework, you have this really expensive service center. It's probably going to cost at least $500,000 ballpark on the low end to get it open and operating. And then you have, these facilitators who are trained, and then, and then they dole out to a client, and it's this very top down, like at the end of the day, this rich, you enter this like expensive facility, and somebody through this chain of command says you're allowed to have mushrooms. And the idea behind one of the ideas behind the entheogenic practitioners' privileges that and duties that I've kind of promoted is that it is a more horizontal model where communities own their own means of production. Communities are able to, produce their own sacrament and kind of give it to members of the community. And it just allows them more latitude and more flexibility in putting it in a community context, as opposed to, top down. So it's kind of a different way of thinking about it, because I think it has been, in the therapeutic model, it's like the therapist gives it to you. And in this, the community does it. And, community is how psychedelics, I think, in every indigenous tradition that I'm aware of that has a plant sacrament, has always taken them in a community context, in ceremony. And so it's really only kind of honoring that legacy, and only honoring, kind of the place where we got mushrooms from, which was, of course, Maria Sabina, and how, she let R. Gordon Wasson into her community, and it just resulted in complete devastation to her home, to her community. It resulted ultimately in government crackdown on traditional practice, ancient mushroom practice. That, after the circus,
there was a resurgence of empire shutting down religion that they didn't like. Because they suffered through that plenty, I'm sure, from the Spanish conquistadors and under orders from other religions who didn't want to give up control.
Yeah.
But we have these really exciting Christian priests and rabbis that are very interested in setting up shop in Oregon, and that's going to be really fascinating. I'm really excited for them to be able to practice above ground. Like, it's going to transform religion in America in some really interesting ways.
I think it really is. It's really hard to underestimate how impactful this is going to be on culture, I think, more broadly. But it's certainly for therapy and for religion, it's just going to be a total paradigm changing thing. People, I've talked to a lot of people who have never had a mystical experience in their entire life. And, I think was lucky enough to have them kind of as a kid without needing necessarily, drugs to occasion them. But, it kind of blows my mind to think that there's somebody who lives their entire lives without ever having like kind of a mystical experience. And what does that do to your whole worldview? to have that. And I mean, I can just see it being kind of a transformative development in our evolution as a society.
What will it look like? No clue, but it will be transformative. I think there will be, could go on this religious track for so long, John. I don't want to go too far off track, but so what's your opinion right now? Does it look hopeful that there will be healthy allowance for religion?
We haven't really seen much signaling from OHA or from the broader board. I mean, this conversation just happened on February 3rd. My article through Psychedelics Today came out the same day. So I think that this material is kind of new to people. And the comments I got after the presentation were not necessarily negative. I think one person was just kind of wrestling with the fact that they're thinking of this in terms of facilitator to client ratios and how does this fit into that. And I think it's just a matter where
it's a different conversation.
I think if we have to right now educate people about what that looks like, what the proposal really means. And the more people, I think, understand it, the more comfortable they'll be with it, because it really it really shouldn't be scary to folks, because it really just kind of creates creates space for, the container that has always been the container for psychedelics. I mean, since, humans, presumably, I mean, I've not heard of a culture that doesn't do them ceremonially in a community context. And so this just kind of gives people the means to do that. And particularly where it's thought that, I mean, I heard somebody else say they don't think that even a group session under the normal program will be available for less than $1,000. And that's a group session, which is way too expensive. I mean, we can't.
That's going to make the black market explode. Yeah. Thankfully, most substances are decriminalized in Oregon, so that helps that. But that's when the more rules we make and the more expensive we make it, you're going to drive people to the black market. There's still black market cannabis growers, people, still today. Yeah. So even in Colorado, I have probably 50 of them in town here in a really small town. So what are we trying to do? Are we trying to provide safety? If you're making incentives that creating incentives that drive people to the black market, you're not creating safety. You're in fact doing the opposite. So keep that in mind, folks. I'm sorry to be a buzzkill, but this is a really important discussion.
Yeah, I like to think of it as if Maria Sabina were still alive today and she wanted to come in Oregon and do a ceremony, is Oregon going to allow her to do that, first off? And second off, would that ceremony be affordable to Maria Sabina?
I'm thinking let's totally jump to a different thing. It's almost like only Oregon piano players can play piano in Oregon, and nobody from Europe, nobody from Massachusetts or Berkeley School of Music is allowed to play piano there. And maestros, world-class experts, not allowed to come to your place and operate. That's it. They can't operate. They're operating within guidelines. But go ahead. Sorry, John.
Yeah, they could probably teach in the training program. They could probably, if they were
be in the
religious. Room? Yeah, there's nothing I've seen so far that would prohibit that. So they could be around. They could even help train. They just couldn't be licensed as a facilitator. And under the entheogenic practitioners proposal, they could even come and lead ceremony, because that if you're leading a ceremony, that's by nature a directive act, right? Like it's Oregon's program has to be facilitated in a non-directive manner. So if Maria Sabina were alive, she could come and conceivably facilitate, or not facilitate, but lead a ceremony, and because she wouldn't be acting as a facilitator at that point. So
does shamanic practice count as non-directive?
Probably not. Probably the
And that's like
facilitator.
an infringement on religion in an interesting way. So please note that, folks.
Well, so the proposal would have the facilitator kind of wait outside of the ceremonial space, but be close enough to it that they could be alerted if trouble were, if assistance were needed, or they could be inside the space if they if they want to participate, as long as their participation doesn't result in them being directive. I think is kind of how I've tried to kind of balance all that and give maximum flexibility to religious practitioners. So we'll see what the state does with that, but I think there may be some more discussion about that in the coming weeks and months. And all the subcommittee recommendations are due next month. So
Good Lord.
then after that, the board just has 4 meetings to weigh through all of them and finalize everything that they're going to do. So there were some things that I noticed in the draft rules that OHA did that had nothing to do with the board. So for instance, they added vegetable glyceride as a possible solvent for extraction of psilocybin. And that was something that I don't believe the board had recommended or anything. So they are doing their own kind of homework and their due diligence and coming up with things, at least on some issues. So the board recommendations are not dispositive. They are highly persuasive and influential, but they're not the end of the story. So, hopefully within the next few months, we'll get some good recommendations. And, I really think that Oregon just has to, I just don't really see that they, being the progressive state that Oregon is and the forward thinking state, with good progressive values, I just don't see restricting this unreasonably as being kind of like something that Oregon has in it. But I don't know. I'm not counting this as over yet, so we'll have to just kind of stay tuned and see how it unfolds.
Well, John, I'm really happy you're there. I'm also happy you tipped me off on this vegetable glycerin extraction. I've never heard of that before. That's fun. Probably won't do it. Maybe in Jamaica. But which I'm hoping to be there all May, which could be fun. But so any place you want to direct people to learn more about all of this stuff you're doing?
So I try to post all of my work on this on my LinkedIn page. It's been exploding lately. There's just been a lot of interviews and articles and conversations about this stuff. So it's kind of blown up quite a bit, but I've got kind of my body of work on there about this. I even got a pretty good article from Psychedelic Health News out of the UK covered it. And so I think I'm expecting we'll likely see some more press around it pretty soon. So
outstanding.
That's probably the one place to I can say here's the the hub of where I know the material that's out there about this is kind of centralized. So
great. And we'll have a link somewhere for that. And then there's so much I want to say, but we should wrap. So thank you all for being here. Psychedelics loves being able to support this Eyes on Oregon project. And there's so much work left to do, everybody. Get loud, get involved, especially in your own state. I'm in Colorado, so we have John there doing the work. Jessica, the recording will be on YouTube. It's also going to be on Facebook. So there's Psychedelics Today, you'll find it. Eyes on Oregon, you'll find it. Yeah. And if you're curious about what we're up to at Psychedelics Today, check out vitalpsychedelictraining.com or just go to psychedelicstoday.com and you can learn about our massively interesting training program that we're very excited about, working wildly hard on. The whole team is flat out on it, and check it out. We'd love to have you learn more. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again in, I believe, 2 weeks, John, right?
Yep, 2 weeks. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Happy Valentine's Day, all. Take care. See you next time.
Bye.